Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Yeah, welcome back, everyone. We do a lot of guests here on this show, and never to this point where we have somebody that resonates with others and makes phone calls or sends questions in for a guest, like we get with this gentleman. Good Advice Helps with Dr. Allan Gold, a school psychologist for many years in the Reed School District in California, San Francisco specifically, and got questions from the career aspect to parents having challenges with their children. We're going to dig into that today. I wish I could tell you what this show is about, but we'll find out. We go through the questions. Welcome back, Allan. How are you doing today?
Okay, thank you. Keeping warm. It's a little chilly in San Francisco, but not as bad as other parts of the country.
I need a sweater. You have a sweater on. It's
Yes,
probably 15 degrees warmer where you are than in New York. And
probably.
yeah, got the heat. Well, you know what? Truth be told, I'm going to be honest with you. We had snow recently. This is very transparent. Of course, there's heat in this building, but I have a space heater over here. And this is probably too much information. I'm drying my socks on it right now. I'm not even
Well,
kidding. Because it snowed and your feet are wet walking
yeah, your
around and
feet
everything.
get wet, sure.
Oh, once your feet are wet, you're freezing.
Yeah,
So let's dig into some listener questions if we may. You good with that?
sure.
Okay. By the way, instant feedback, Steve at gmail.com if you ever want to connect with us. And let's go for a question related to career and something that you've done for decades in supporting children in school psychologically. This is from Chris in Portland, Oregon, and says, thank you for being on the show. I've heard there's a growing demand for school psychologists, which is encouraging, but I've also heard about burnout in school settings. From your experience, what should everyone entering the field know about workload, stress management, and maintaining a healthy work-life balance?
Well, it's an excellent question, and it really depends on one's own personal characteristics. Some people are better able to tolerate stress than others. Um, and so I won't say that there is not stress from the job. One difference between working for a public institution like a school and having a private practice is the one thing you really don't have much control over
Hmm.
is the workload. If you're a private practitioner, and you have enough clients and somebody wants to see you, then you can say, no, I'm full. But when you're in schools, you're the one that people will come and need your services. You can certainly juggle time and that kind of thing, but there are some very specific time requirements. For example, if a student is um, being assessed for special education, there are time limits on that. From the time the parents sign permission for assessment until the individual education plan or the final meeting there are 60 calendar days for that. So that can put some pressure on people. Um, as far as and if there's a crisis and you've got other things to do, but there's a on-campus crisis where you are needed, then of course you have to respond. However, there is a lot of flexibility in the job. It's not like a teacher where you have to be there all the time. You can set aside time for, I know there's numbers of school psychologists who actually set aside time during the day to write reports. I never did that. I always used to do it at home because I like to spend most of my day with teachers or kids or parents. But there's that flexibility. Um, you can set up your own times for observing kids in class, for assessing kids, for counseling kids, for groups. So that actually helps a lot. Um, but I think I've recommended this before. I think it's very important that a school psychologist or any psychologist for that matter, or social worker, has their own personal therapist because
Mm,
it's so important to deal with the emotional challenges that one has. Whether it's if you're feeling that I have to solve this problem, but I don't know what to do, or I can't communicate with this kid, or this kid is being really resistant or not very nice to me. Um, these are things that one's own sense of self and willingness to be flexible and excuse one's um, imperfections, because we're all imperfect. We don't know how to solve everything. Um, so I think that having the personal psychologist, regularly, maybe not even necessarily once every week, but to discuss one's own emotions and one's intellectual challenges or situational challenges with an unbiased, helpful person really helps, I think. Um, but some people get more burnt out than others. I mean, I worked for 48 years, but I never felt burnt out. I
mm.
always felt, um, and I try to think about, did I ever really feel burnt out? No, I might feel stressed. I might feel like I had a lot to do, and how am I going to squeeze all these, different cases into one day? But I was able to do that, and I never felt like this is too much. I'm out of here. I just never felt that way, because the positive. I think, for all of us, we have to try to look at the glass half full rather than half empty. That we look at the positive effects that we have on other people. Um, and if you have a case during the day that doesn't work out too well, look at all the cases that you might have that do work out well. So you have to be kind to yourself. And part of that question was, how do you take care of yourself?
Mm.
Um, so people should be able to find relaxing um, activities, associate with friends, hobbies, listening to music, resting, reading, walking. Um, you know, they don't, everything doesn't have to be finished immediately, and school psychologists often put a ton of pressure on themselves. I've got to get this done. I've got to get this done. I've got to get this done. But if it takes until tomorrow, it's not the end of the world, unless you are dealing with a crisis. If a teacher is dealing with a absolutely misbehaving kid, or if a kid is threatening suicide, or if there's a sudden death in the family or something like that, then you have to deal with that. But you can also feel, the basic sense of, I'm a helping person and I'm doing this to help somebody else's life. That is very gratifying, and it really helps to undo the um, negative feelings about the job.
Well, especially the pros and the cons. Private practice, you're on your own, essentially,
Yeah,
in this school setting. And you've revealed this before, that you have others to rely on, colleagues. So be it administrators, teachers, maybe another psychologist, whatever the situation may be. And, we're talking about one particular student. Let's say you can get feedback from others and different views to help you move that psychology treatment along, right?
right. And teamwork is, I have always found very valuable.
Yeah.
You don't feel like you have total responsibility for solving a problem.
Well,
I
like a
mean, people
CSI
look up.
investigator,
Yeah,
it's like you have data coming in from others. Let's say a teacher or some teachers, they may reveal something that you didn't know, only because
sure.
The student didn't tell you that.
Right.
You weren't
Yeah.
aware.
Or, you weren't in the class when
Yeah,
whatever was going on. So yes, you
absolutely.
have to rely on others' input or parents' input,
Sure.
for sure.
Mm,
But the teamwork I think, is an extremely helpful um, uh, characteristic of the job because it really helps you not feel totally responsible for solving everything because you're not the only one involved with the kid. So,
mm,
but although people look up to you as the one who has all the answers, but still, um, you're not,
right.
and it is teamwork.
So we have more career questions. We're going to get to those in a sec. Going to look at one now from a parent. Instant feedback, Steve at gmail.com. Lena is in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and says, my child was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and while the support has helped well, there my son is starting to feel different from their peers. How do school psychologists help students with ADHD build confidence, advocate for themselves, and see differences as strengths rather than labels? Hmm.
Very good question.
Yeah.
I don't know how old the child is,
Yeah, it doesn't say.
but I think it's important to at least sooner or later be honest with the child so that they don't blame themselves for whatever's different about them. I mean, you can certainly talk about how all people are different. Some people are good at this and not good at that, and whatever it happens to be. And if the kid is at least 9 or 10 years old, you can be honest with them. I mean, I've worked with 7 and 8-year-old kids who knew that they had ADHD. And you can say, this is something that the chemicals in your brain are making it harder for you to um, pay attention and to learn some things, but there are plenty of ways to help you with that, including medication. Um, and so that's the main thing. You don't want the kid to feel bad about himself or herself. It's not their fault. And um, I always like to show this. It's a YouTube video. Um, it's called the Gymnast Without Legs.
Mm,
And I don't know if I've ever mentioned it before, but I've shown it to kids who have disabilities, and it's a true story about this young woman who was adopted by a rather older family in rural Illinois, and she was born without legs. And when she was about 4 years old, they got her a trampoline and she started bouncing on it. And she became actually there was all that in this video. She became actually pretty athletic. And the motto of the family was, we don't say can't. And so this young woman, there were pictures of her playing basketball, scuffling around the area there. And it turned out when she was 16, she asked, well, who are my real families? It turned out, and her idol was an Olympic gymnast, a woman. And it turned out that she was born in Romania, and her idol was actually her blood sister.
get
And
out of here.
yes, and they
Wow.
reconnected. They reconnected, and well, I guess the video was made maybe 5 years ago, but she was able to drive, and she was doing acrobatics, and I think moved to Hollywood and was in shows and stuff. But the message to kids was, if this woman who had no legs could do everything that she did, if you have a learning disability, if you have ADHD, um, I showed it to one of my students who was a little person, a dwarf. I don't think we say the word dwarf anymore, but anyway, um, to say, you know, you can be different and you can still accomplish lots of things.
Mm,
Um, So I think one of the most challenging things I dealt with ADHD kids was um, dealing with parents and who were anti-medication. And so that can be a problem. And sometimes kids will take it when they're you know 8, 9, 10, 11, and then they get to be adolescents and I don't want to take this medication anymore. So that's a challenge. But I think just getting the kid to accept that, this is who I am, it's a difference, but it is treatable and certainly I think I've mentioned it before, getting kids with ADHD a 504 plan, Section
Mm,
504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There can be many accommodations that support the child. Um,
mm,
and so that's really important. If a child's academic uh, performance or learning is super impacted, then they can be eligible for special education under the category of other health impairment. And ADHD qualifies for that. So if their attention is so bad and they're not being medicated and their learning is well below grade level and they need one-to-one or small group academic support, then they can have that under special education. But anybody with ADHD really is eligible for a 504 plan if it's impacting them at all. Um,
we bring up I think a great point in that the language we use determines our outcome and future, and the word can't. I've tried to abolish that from my vocabulary. For
yeah,
example, how many times does somebody say, I can't wait? I can't wait for that. You can't wait. What are you talking about?
yeah, you can, right?
It's a negative. So I can't wait to go to that new restaurant tonight. All right, we get it. You're excited. But
Yeah,
it's a negative as opposed to I'm looking forward
forward to
to
that.
going to that
Yeah,
restaurant. And just one
yeah,
example, but you
yeah.
said it, the language that we use kind of frames our situation and who
Yeah.
we are.
I mean, there are some things that, people simply can't do. I mean,
Sure.
I don't think that gymnast could play soccer, but who knows? If they had made an adjustment and she could hit a soccer ball with her hand instead of a
Right?
foot,
Hmm.
who knows? But having that positive attitude and accepting oneself for one's differences, we all have to do that. Um, but helping a child do that and having the parents support the child's um, building a solid self-esteem, even though they have a problem that they have no control over. I mean, I've certainly dealt with many kids with learning disabilities, and the older you get, the more you can kind of explain exactly what's not working and how we can help that. And you talk about people with learning disabilities who eventually learn how to read or how to do
Hmm.
math. It's not impossible, the like not using the word can't, you'll never be able to do this. But, a lot of kids, it also depends on how other kids treat them. Particularly with ADHD, a very impulsive kid will have negative um, uh, responses from other kids. And so that's why it's important as a community and a classroom to really support these kids. I mean, I've worked in classrooms with autistic kids, and we've actually taught and little ones. I remember like first or second grade, and explain that, and certainly further grades further up. I remember with the special day class kids, kids whose disabilities and needs are, require them to be at least half of the day in a special day class. And but then they would also be integrated into a regular class for part of the day. And I would talk to the kids about the kid's disability and how they can support that kid rather than, make fun of the kid.
Mm.
But the natural inclination of people, I'm afraid, is to, not be nice to kids if they're different. And we're seeing so much of that politically now too, is not kids, but if you're different, you better you better be watching out, and you better be scared actually and protect yourself.
Mm.
But for kids, at least we can work with a whole class. And I found that kids were, if I'd asked, how can you support so and so? And they would come up with some pretty good ideas.
Yeah.
Invite them to, like an autistic kid, invite them to play and, those kind of things. So, uh, kids are flexible and can grow in their skills to help other kids.
So let's help somebody on the career path. That would be Trevor. Madison, Wisconsin says, hello. I'm deciding between school psychology and clinical psychology and finding the overlap a little confusing. Could you talk about the biggest differences in daily work, work environment, and long-term career satisfaction?
Okay. That's actually pretty clear. A clinical psychologist is going to see a client regularly for, the standard 50 minutes. They will probably get to know them in a much deeper way than you actually, if you're seeing lots of kids during the day. Um, but the what I because I had the choice of being a private psychologist or not, and I think that some people do better just with one other person. Um, some people are much more uh, extroverted and socially, what should I say, adept, or like the interaction that you get from school psychology, because as I've said earlier, you have all these other people to work with. But some people don't like to do that. They just feel they want to go much more deeply into a person's history and their emotional challenges and so on, and work with them. Um, I think another disadvantage of that, and I don't want to really call it a disadvantage, but the person who is the clinical psychologist really does feel um, all of that responsibility. They're being paid, whether they get it from insurance or from the client themselves. Um, and so, I think there's probably more pressure to really solve the person's problems. Um, but some people just like that. They that doesn't bother them, the business aspect of it, and the money aspect of it. And they just really like forming that very, very close bond with with their clients. That doesn't mean that a school psychologist can't make close bonds, but because you see more kids and have more uh, well, pressure, as I said earlier, in this to, that you've got to deal with whomever needs you. Um, but you still get to meet a lot of different kids, and working in a school, you also have the opportunity to meet kids who maybe are not suffering from pretty severe problems, like a kid who would be going to a private therapist. So, you can
Did
go in
you? I
class.
want to ask you right at that point there, right at that
Yeah,
point, Alan, did you ever in your career, now we're talking with about Trevor's question, clinical and school psychology, did you ever have a couple of moments where you're like, you know what, maybe, clinical or private practice may have been maybe a good idea at some point. Yeah. Did you ever waver between the two
not really, no.
okay.
No,
Wow.
not for me, but I'm sure I mean, I've known other school psychologists. I have actually a very good friend who I met in graduate school, and she got her school psychology degree, but then went on to do um, private therapy. Um, herself. She,
Mm.
got further training, and so it really depends on your own personality, and people who are not as comfortable dealing with lots of different people the way you do in a school system, and trying to figure out how do I deal with this person, how do I deal with that person, and so on. Not just the kids, but your co-workers and so on. It may seem easier just to have to focus on the client and not have to deal with that. Um, but I'm probably sounding a little biased because I loved my job and I felt very comfortable with all the different roles and all the different kids that I met, like, kids who would come to me for social interaction problems. They weren't necessarily mentally disturbed, but,
Hmm.
I could help them. Did I know them down to their core? No, but, I felt like I was able to make a difference in a lot of kids' lives. And, that was
Mm.
important. And then there are those kids where you really do need to be more like the clinical psychologist. Somebody's going through, a severe depression, and you make sure you see them every week and talk about that. So there is in the school psychology job that sort of a range of how intimately and how sort of clinically you can deal with some kids. Some kids it's one time and you just have a discussion and you work things out. And with other kids, it can be over years. That's one nice
Mm.
thing too about the
It
school
seems like
psychology.
as a career in the school psychology situation, you got variety.
Yes.
In clinical, you see the same patients every week. Nothing wrong with that. But
No.
you're picking up where you left off about their challenges. Here, you don't know what's coming through your door. It may be little Jimmy. You've been seeing him for, a year or more, and he's, dealing with a parental, maybe a divorce or something, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. But then, Becky comes through the door. Becky, we never met. How are you? What's going on? It's
Yeah.
always
Right.
something
Exactly.
new.
No, because I love the variety there,
Mm.
and I also love the not always the intensity of, like a private client,
Yes.
can be
I
pretty
know where you're going with that.
intense.
Little Jimmy could be
Yeah,
walking through, or Becky or whoever, and somebody said something to them in the lunchroom, and they got upset, and maybe a kid made fun of them, or whatever it might be. So it's
right,
not maybe per se a heavier situation, but one that needs to
right.
be addressed because
And
it's a
exactly. I think
challenge.
that puts it exactly right. And I always appreciated the variety of the job
Sure.
because when I was tired of assessing kids, I could counsel kids. When I was
Right.
tired of counseling kids, I could assess kids or plan a parent meeting or
Yep.
um,
Or it's
I
after school, time for a club. Like you
yeah,
used to
well, I
facilitate a
did my
bunch.
math. I did my math clubs for years. Now,
Yeah.
not most school psychologists wouldn't do that. That was my math background that I wanted to exercise as well,
Yes,
and I
but
would do
you
those
revealed
before
too,
school.
you also created clubs for diversity, divorced
Yeah,
children as well, all different ones. So it's just
right.
another
Yeah.
aspect of the career. I appreciate
Yes,
you.
which is yeah, which is why I love the career so much because of that variety, you know.
I love your
I mean, I've even
transparency.
thought, would I like to be a teacher? Well, I often thought, teachers have to do the same thing. When I was in graduate school, I was um, since I had a statistics background, I was a TA for the statistics professor. But when I was in graduate school in school psychology, and I would do a whole day, and the morning 2 hour session, I was a little anxious. The second one was perfect, and the third one, I was bored. I know how to
Mm.
do this already. But teachers have that, not that teachers get bored with things, but they don't quite have the variety of different
Yeah.
activities, although they can create as much as they want to, but so I appreciated that over those years.
Yeah, thank you for the insight, the advice for those looking at the career and help with the parents. And I forgot to put this PS in here of one of these emails that we got. And okay, thank you for addressing mental health in schools. It means a lot to parents. They put that in.
Yeah.
There was who was
Well,
that?
and
Lena.
also, I think in one of those emails, they said that there's I guess it was the last one. It was a greater need for
Yes.
school psychologists, and I couldn't feel more in agreement with that because kids these days are under so much pressure and challenge from social media and everything. They need somebody
Yeah,
to help them get through childhood these days. And
100%.
like when I was growing up, we didn't even have a school psychologist, I don't think. And now that I know what some of my peers were going through, which nobody talked about, I was thinking that we really could have used, or, all of us could have used some help with that. But,
We didn't talk about it.
I
It
think,
was it was taboo, even for a kid, for to
yeah,
little Jimmy's got something going on there. Oh, let's not talk about it. Um, Fortunately,
yeah.
it's different now.
I also want to say if any of these people would like to contact me, to discuss, then
Mm,
I would be happy to do that.
I appreciate that.
Whether it's,
Instant
whether it's
feedback, Steve at
somebody thinking
gmail.com.
about their career or parents. So, yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. Instant feedback, Steve at gmail.com. Probably the easiest, best way to reach us, and we'll forward everything on to Alan. Thank you again for being here today and all the insight. It resonates. People are reaching out, and feel free to. You got a question, a comment. If you want to even keep it anonymous, that's perfectly fine as well. Thank you again, Alan.
Okay, and happy holidays.
You too. Yeah, appreciate it. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.